Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting tomorrow of the Environment and Natural Areas Committee. This evening there are three committee meetings. First, Environment and Natural Areas, then Community Planning Committee, followed by Public Works and Protective Services Committee. And there'll be an opportunity for public participation with each committee. And so just keep that in mind. If people have cell phones, if they turn them off, that would be great. And before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the territory that we're meeting on here tonight. The First Nations of Vancouver Island, the Coast Salish peoples, have inhabited this area for thousands of years. I was interested this evening, I was looking at the Tumuk Treaty Association map called the Statement of Intent, setting up for deciding what's going to be happening with the treaty lands. And I'm looking at the map, I noticed something new to me, and that is not only is Chosin situated on Shannon First Nations territory, of course also the Sioux Nation First Nations, but it also includes Songhees First Nation on the other end of our district. So that was kind of a new learning for me. We've got the agenda before us. I wonder if there are any changes to the agenda. Are people happy with what we've got? Hearing no objections, we will accept the agenda as it is. And the first thing this evening, we have a presentation by Andrew Gage from West Coast Environmental Law. And Andrew's going to tell us about the Sioux Big Oil campaign. Andrew's a lawyer working with West Coast Environmental Law and has been working on this campaign for a little bit. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for accommodating me when I was unable to present to you last month due to health issues. And thanks to the Environmental Advisory Committee for recommending that you support this action. I'm hoping to persuade you that to work with other local governments to bring a class action lawsuit against fossil fuel companies is the fiscally responsible thing to do. British Columbia has experienced massive amounts of costs due to climate change. In 2021 we had the heat dome, we had wildfires, we had flooding all in 1 year, and of course this past summer has also been a big year for wildfires. Each of these events was significantly more likely due to climate change, and we will see significantly more of these types of events in the future. In fact, the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities estimates that across the country, local governments should be spending $5.3 billion every year to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Local governments own 60% of public infrastructure, almost none of which was designed to accommodate the increasing range of temperatures and climate extremes that we're going to experience as a result of climate change. This image taken from View Royal's website highlights some of the impacts of climate change we expect in this region, and each one of them carries with them significant cost to local governments as we prepare to avoid those impacts or to deal with them when they occur. Your own climate action plan highlights some of the impacts. For example, heat waves and droughts. You talk about, as the plan highlights, we've already experienced heat wave, and we've also experienced multi-year droughts. And the quote talks about the human impact, but there's also the financial impact of cooling centers, of assistance to residents to keep them safe, and other costs to infrastructure. Rainfall, extreme precipitation and storms, and highlighting, you've highlighted that will result in 10 to 20% increase in precipitation by the 2080s, triggering landslides, exacerbating flooding, and extreme weather events and storms. And of course wildfires, the increased risk particularly to communities that are at the interface between forest lands and more urban areas. They're projected to become more frequent and intense throughout the region. May result in increased wildfire smoke, reduced air quality, as well as an increased risk of wildfires for Chosin and the surrounding area. So all of these costs are costs that that you'll be incurring. And the question is, have we wrapped our head around just how large they will be and how we're going to pay for them? sea level rise, I missed one. Of course, can be hugely impacted. And a 2014 CRD analysis looking specifically at Albert Head Lagoon suggested that there'd be $3.4 million in assessed residential land and improvement values in terms of costs. Now, increasingly, scientists can actually identify the companies, the role of the fossil fuel industry and cement companies and other companies in giving rise to these problems. Just 90 entities are responsible for 2/3 of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, and many of these companies are responsible for 3 or 4% individually. And those same companies were warned, many of them in 1959, by Dr. Edward Teller, speaking to the American Petroleum Institute on the future of energy, about the fact that using these products would result in sea level rise and a significant challenge to coastal communities. And in the decades that followed, their scientists reiterated that again and again, telling them that we needed to find different sources of energy, that we needed to reduce emissions from fossil fuels. In many cases, the companies actually took out patents on renewable technology that they failed to develop. And when governments started working to address the problem in the late 80s and 90s, these same companies undertook a massive campaign of misinformation and efforts to try to lobby against climate solutions and to delay action on climate change. These are just a few of the reports that are available that document those years of misinformation. But to take just one example, Exxon, Chevron, the American Petroleum Institute, and other corporations were part of the Global Science Communications Plan, which sought to literally convince people that those advocating for climate action on the basis of science were out of touch with reality. And unfortunately, they were successful. And we still to this day see companies that again and again are putting their profits ahead of the health of our communities. BP, Shell, and Suncor have all rolled back their climate commitments because they're making too much money from selling fossil fuels. Now, 23 academics in 2021 undertook a review saying, well, why haven't we actually been able to bend the curve and reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally? And the answer that they came up with, looking at this through a range of different lenses, is power, and especially the power of the fossil fuel industry and the fossil fuel economy and the entrenched interests in that have again and again frustrated our ability to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So the So Big Oil campaign calls on you and other local governments to work together to bring a class action lawsuit, among other actions of working to protect us from the impacts of climate change, to bring a class action lawsuit and to set aside $1 per resident towards the costs of doing so. The idea is that by pooling resources, we can keep this manageable. A lawsuit of this nature takes these separate costs. Right now we've got a situation where those companies make those decisions because they and their investors make massive profits while expecting our communities to pay for the costs of climate change. And the goal of a lawsuit is to actually bring those together so that those costs show up on the balance sheets of these companies while also giving our communities the necessary resources to protect ourselves from climate change, so that they and their investors make better business decisions that reflect the harm to our communities and to the world while ensuring that we can keep ourselves safe. It's legally possible. This is a screenshot from the Friends of the Earth Netherlands celebrating their win against Shell in the Netherlands. We've seen lawsuits against tobacco and opioids and other companies that have put their profits ahead of the truth and of the harm they were causing. And there are now over 40 local and state governments, most recently California among them, suing fossil fuel companies in the US on precisely this type of legal basis. And there's 28 law professors here in Canada that have written an open letter to local governments such as yourselves saying that this is possible under Canadian law as well. And because it's brought as a class action lawsuit, local governments can pool their resources, but also a class action in BC protects both sides from having to pay the other side's legal fees if they're unsuccessful. So that's very important, obviously, given that there is some novelty to the case. I don't want to suggest this is a slam dunk, but it's a case that could be won, and there's a solid economic case for doing this in a responsible way. $1 per resident gets us to the certification stage of a class action. That's the hope here, is if we get enough local governments to do this. At that point, a judge will confirm that the case has merit, that it could be won, and the legal tests for doing so, and so we'll be in a much better position, and the companies and their investors will also have that decision. And it's popular. When people understand that the alternative is that the fossil fuel industry pay none of these costs and that we're just looking for a share through this lawsuit, British Columbians by and large support this idea, less than 20% oppose. So we're at, early on, the judge will confirm this is a winnable case. We hope that results in changes in investor and fossil fuel company behavior. It gets needed resources for our communities. I'm not sure why this slide is cut off, I apologize for that. And the fossil fuel industry, if we're successful, fossil fuel companies and their investors and governments will all record the actual cost of climate change on the on the balance sheets, resulting in better business decisions and a better long-term outcome for our planet. So we're asking you to join with View Royal, but also Gibsons and Squamish, who have voted to support this class action, and we're hoping and expecting that there will be other communities coming forward as this campaign continues. So again, thank you very much for listening to me. I encourage you to, I'd love to hear questions, and answer any concerns about this. Obviously, it sounds radical, but at the end of the day, this is basically economic common sense. It's putting a small amount of money in now so you don't have to pay massive amounts of money for decades to come.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Does anybody have any questions right now? Councillor Shukla.
Thank you, Mr. Gage, for your presentation. You mentioned the risk of, cost consequences if the suit were to fail and the Subig Oil side lost, but you didn't get into any details. So could you?
Yeah, sorry, I intended to. I thought. So BC's class action legislation, the Class Proceedings Act, specifically says that the parties to a class action are not liable for the other side's fees if they are unsuccessful. So that is a significant advantage among several others for local governments deciding to work together in that way.
Okay.
The other thing is that at the end of the day, we're asking you to put in $1 per resident to support other local governments. To support whichever local government becomes the lead plaintiff. I would love for Metchosin to consider playing that role, but it's the lead plaintiff. If there's any risks, it's to the lead plaintiff. Metchosin putting in $1 per resident is simply indicating its support for the class action and to work with other local governments, pledging to work with other local governments. A local government, when we have a critical mass of, where B. Royal suggested 500,000 residents, a local government will need to step up and be a lead plaintiff. If there's any risks, they're taking that on. Metchosin's not making a commitment beyond the $1 per resident and the sort of moral commitment to continue to support each other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to you kind of said, answering this, but apart from the risk if something fails, are municipalities going to be asked to contribute more money down the road to keep a lawsuit alive?
So our hope and expectation is that the $1 per resident is enough to get the class action certified, which is the first stage of a class action lawsuit. And the judge then will rule. If the judge rules no, that this can't be brought as a class action, or that the case doesn't have merit, we're back to the drawing board. And the $1 per resident is lost, but there's no need for any further funds. If there's further funds required, it'll be because the judge says, yeah, this case could be won, it should be heard as a class action, and here's what the municipalities will have to prove in order to win this lawsuit. And at that point, first of all, we're in a much better position to do all kinds of fundraising. We know we can go to a philanthropist, say, a judge has said this case could be won. We can go to do crowdfunding on that basis. But there may also at that point be requests to local governments to consider putting further funds. There's no obligation to do so, and you would be doing so on the basis of the information in the judgment confirming that there was a legal basis for taking the case further. So you can make an informed decision at that point. There's very little risk beyond the $1 per resident in terms of finding out what your legal options are.
Right, thanks.
Councillor Johnson or Mayor Little? Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we'll pick up discussion about Subic Oil in a few minutes when we get down to further down on our agenda. So public participation, would anybody like to speak this evening? If you might tell them what's your name and address or street address.
Okay, my name is Jane Devonshire. Hello again, everyone. I'm from Europe, and I'm here tonight coming to talk about the VRCC, the View Oil Climate Coalition, and we are in support of the Subic Oil Class Action lawsuit, which Andrew just spoke about. Several of our members are on the View Oil Parks, Recreation and Environment Advisory Committee. After doing their due diligence, having researched the Subic Oil campaign, they felt it was in the town's best interest to support this initiative, so made a recommendation to council to support it. In the interim, the councillors were notified of a webinar being hosted by the West Coast Environmental Law with one of the building planners from Hawaii who was working on Subic Oil. Ironically, this was shortly before the devastating fires raged through Lahaina, Maui. Also in attendance was a prominent class action lawsuit lawyer, Ryder Morgan, to explain how there is a good chance of succeeding with this class action lawsuit. People thought that we could never win against big tobacco, big asbestos and big pharma, but we did. Several of our councillors also met with Andrew for a Q&A session, and Andrew was then invited to present to council. This all culminated with View Oil signing on to support the Subic Oil class action lawsuit and to commit to working with other governments on it. So please, keep in mind, we will not be alone in this, and the class action lawsuit would not be launched until we have a critical mass of support of at least 500,000 people. Momentum for this is starting to build. Gibson's was the first to sign on, followed by View Oil, and most recently the District of Squamish voted to join as well. Squamish Council understands that its residents cannot afford the cost of climate change, and that the fossil fuel industry, which has made massive profits from causing climate change, needs to pay its fair share too. Councillor Gord Baird from the Highlands said that their council is also considering it after hearing Andrew present to council. There's also quite a lot of support on Victoria Council. Victoria Councillor Dave Thompson says, the Subic Oil class action lawsuit is about our duty to protect our taxpayers from having to shoulder the burden of the enormous costs that climate change will inflict on our infrastructure. We are already experiencing the effects of climate change locally, with loss of our urban canopy as a result of drought, followed by atmospheric rivers and windstorms. Potholes abound too, and sidewalks are buckling. Trustee Jerry Holman also mentions how costly things should get. He's seen more and more roads washing out. Think of our own Malahat washout. Salt Springs Water Utility has a moratorium on new connections due to more evaporation, longer droughts, greater stress on aquatic ecosystems, and other climate change impact on the island's reservoirs. How is drought affecting Machosen? I attended the huge Youth Fridays for Future rally back in 2019, and I really need to pause here to give a shout out to Rebecca Wolf Gage. She was one of the phenomenal young organizers of this event, which drew 20,000 people. Then we thought we would finally start to see change after that. Since then, I have written copious amounts of letters, signed dozens of petitions, met with MLAs and MPs, and attended even more rallies. But nothing seems to be shifting the needle with the oil and gas companies on climate action. I sincerely feel a class action lawsuit will shake up their shareholders, knowing that their oil and gas companies cannot do business as usual without consequence. As Andrew mentioned, over 40 US states and their local governments are currently proceeding with class action lawsuits as they have experienced the devastation of severe weather events. So I strongly encourage you to please join us in adding your voice to this very critical initiative. Your residents will thank you for your foresight. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Jane. From View Oil.
Good evening. My name is Janet Ray. I'm a physician at the Acute Medical Detox Unit in Victoria. I live in Saanich, and I'm a member of CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. I'm here to advocate that Metchosin and add their municipality to a class action lawsuit against Big Oil, as Andrew Gage has just outlined. As a physician, I'll begin by showing what I think is a very relevant example. Tobacco use remains a leading cause of cancer, heart, and lung disease. In fact, it's the leading cause of disease and death in Canada, killing 46,000 Canadians annually. The cost of caring for individuals affected by tobacco is borne by us, the taxpayers, and has contributed considerably to the crisis in the healthcare system, while major profits go to the big tobacco. News leaked in the 1990s that tobacco companies knew and lied about their products causing health harms and being addictive. It followed that in 1998, all U.S. states won a major lawsuit against the country's 4 major tobacco companies, which agreed to pay for billions of dollars in damages caused by their products. In Canada, provincial lawsuits are currently collectively seeking more than $500 billion in damages for tobacco-related healthcare costs, making these the largest lawsuits in Canadian history so far. So what does this have to do with Sue Big Oil? From my physician lens, the scenarios are virtually identical between big tobacco and big oil. Oil companies, as we've seen, have known for well over 50 years that use of their products is responsible for global heating, and yet have done everything they can to hide the truth, create doubt, and continue business as usual as our climate comes ever closer to a tipping point. As we know from the increasingly dire warnings from the IPCC, climate heating is the biggest health crisis of our time and an existential threat to human civilization and way of life as we know it. Catastrophic floods, fires, loss of life and property, sea level rise, to name a few. Mitigating and repairing damage from climate disruption is going to be increasingly expensive to all levels of government, including municipalities that are responsible for public infrastructure and safety. And so far, we the taxpayers are on the hook to repair and prepare for damages. I don't have time to go into the personal and direct health harms of using and extracting oil and gas. In addition to the physical health harms, lack of government climate action is affecting youth mental health. The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal from Britain, published a study in December 2021 entitled "Climate Anxiety in Children and Young People and Their Beliefs About Government Responses to Climate Change, a Global Survey." They surveyed 10,000 young people ages 16 to 25 from 10 different countries, 1,000 participants per country. Respondents from all countries were worried about climate change. 84% worried, moderately worried, and a full 45% said climate change affected their daily life and functioning. Emotions included sadness, anxiety, anger, powerlessness. To quote their findings, climate anxiety and distress were correlated with perceived inadequate government response and associated with feelings of betrayal. You don't need a medical degree to know that young people who are feeling depressed, anxious, and helpless are much more likely to seek escape through drug use as a way to numb out and deal with overwhelming and uncomfortable feelings. I see this every day at detox. Like big tobacco, it's not if, but when big oil start to pay their fair share of damages. Voting in favor of suing big oil will show that Metchosin Council understands the science, the urgency, and the looming costs of the climate crisis, and are doing everything you can to take decisive action and give cause for hope in your community, and especially for your young people. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Would anybody else like to join in public participation this evening?
Yes, Nicole Shukin, Lavon Road resident. I just want to sort of add my support to the Sous Big Oil campaign. I think that in Machosen's case, we're really lucky because it's a small outlay with only 5,000 plus residents is just largely a symbolic contribution. But what we have to save fiscally, as Mr. Gage suggested, is huge in Machosen given the number of people who live in forest interface areas and the green belt, the fact that we live in a green belt area in the region. So I just lend my support.
Thank you.
Pat Whitehouse, Rocky Point Road, me too.
Penny Chosen Road. I was just messaging while I was hearing this, my friends in this anti-fracking chat that I'm in, and just wanted to say, well, first to Andrew, Ashley Zerbanti says you're great and we have to support you. So, to me, when I hear about this, I think a lot about the fact that we do need to transition away from big oil and all this, and I don't want to pay for it. I want them to pay for it. So that's really motivating to me, I think, for this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan McDonald, Wooten Road. I'll add my little 2 bits. I've been an environmental coordinator for the oil and gas industry for over 15 years, including working in Africa. Just one little example, I did a project in Mauritius. It's the island where the dodo comes from, if any of you know your natural history. Well, the dodo came from, to be precise. And I worked on a project there with on a wetland plan that was essential for the local fishers, because that's where they catch the little bait fish. So these are very, very poor people that live with no running water or electricity. They catch bait fish in a wetland. It's an estuary right beside a giant port that deals with oil cargo. And as someone who does research in the sciences, we look at the micro impacts of the oil in terms of droplets on mangroves and the impacts of invertebrate life in wetlands. It's a major stopover for the migratory birds that come from Siberia all the way down to the east coast of Africa. It's one of the major flyways of the planet, and it's the last undeveloped wetland estuary on the East African coastline. And so I can say from first-hand report that, far away, these little tiny impacts affect thousands of people, their way of life, and their ability to sustain themselves. So it's not just us in our own little backyard that gets impacted by the tales and the anecdotes that we've heard so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and maybe we'll move along then to the next item on our agenda, which is adoption of minutes of the Environment and Natural Areas Committee meeting of October 16th, 2023.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any comments or questions? I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. The next item we've got is the Environmental Advisory Select Committee minutes here for receipt.
Move receipt.
Thank you, Councillor Shukin.
Second.
And second by Councillor Donaldson. Any discussion?
I just have one question. There was a presentation by Mr. Ted White regarding the dark sky. Do we have a bylaw or a policy on dark sky?
Yes, we have a policy on dark sky, and there's a little plaque on the wall here by the light switch. Ted White's interested in, and he's been working with the Healthy Communities Group, talking about something a little bit more expansive than that in terms of advice. There's been, I think, both interest but also new science in terms of the effect on wildlife in addition to human life. And so Ted's working up a little bit of a paper to bring in and tell us a little bit more about it. So he came to MEASC on the 24th just to tell us of interest, and coming from healthy communities to sort of share and see what MEASC might want to say about it. And we thought it sounded pretty interesting and invited him back. I don't think we're really thinking about a bylaw type situation if you're asking about that. We have the Good Neighbors bylaw, of course, that we're bringing in that mentions light. But this is more about information, for example, the popular use of LEDs. That sort of come into play since we got the dark sky policy in place in Metchosin. It turns out some of the LEDs aren't as good light for nature, that kind of thing.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Abb.
I just want to say, it's my understanding that our dark sky policy just covers municipal property.
Yes, and so our expenditures as a district align with the dark sky policy, but Ted wanted to look a little bit further into the education of the community.
Great, thank you.
I made an error with the agenda too. I forgot to mention the pinks that we have, which we need to add to or take up with our agenda. We'll do that as we go along. Correspondence. Great. Well, those are the sets of minutes that are there. The next item on the agenda then is the Too Big Oil campaign. And you'll see on page 23 that MEASC had taken a look at this some time ago, back in June actually, and unanimously supported the idea that we might join in with the campaign. And I just, before saying much more, Andrew Gage mentioned how our climate just lines up with our climate action plan, where we were looking for money for dealing with habitat protection, restoration, and funds to address climate hazards. But also our climate emergency and biodiversity crisis declaration, where we recognize the emergency we're facing and committed to make decisions and adopt policies accordingly. And I'm reflecting on the bufferland talk you had about the do nothing option. Well, the do nothing option's there, but I think this is a situation where we want to maybe do more. Now, I took a look at the View Royal. View Royal also wrote us and asked if we would, pick this up. And I'm aware that it's also going to hit the CRD table, I think in another month or so, coming from, from the Gulf Islands. And then you'll see a number of letters of support. So that in the back of our agenda package, we've got the letter from View Royal, a note from Bev Bacon, a note from Katy Nelson, and then today in our pinks, correspondence from Joan Rosenberg, Ruth Nickel, Glenn Shentag, Andrew Spray, Kathleen Sutherland, and Jackie Larkin. And they make a compelling reading. So, having looked at the material, I thought I would make the motion myself, and then we can see if someone will second it, we can discuss it and move from there. But the motion would be that the District of Metchosin commit to join a class action suit against selected fossil fuel companies contingent upon other BC municipalities joining and raising a combined minimum of $500,000, and to set aside the equivalent of $1 per resident for its purpose at that time. Any money awarded to the district as a result of a settlement or court order arising from the lawsuit would be used to mitigate any current or future damage caused in Metchosin due to climate change. So that's the motion. If there's a seconder, we can discuss that.
Sorry, where are you reading the motion?
Oh, I took, what I said was we have the motion from MEASC, and then what I did is I took the View Royal a letter of their motion and just put it together into one motion. So it's on page 27 of the agenda package.
Second for discussion.
Thank you so much, Councillor. So you heard the arguments about the situation. I was in the Ministry of Health in the early days of the BC suing Big Tobacco, and colleagues from the Attorney General carried that forward. It hasn't been settled yet, is my understanding. Sue Big Tobacco in the United States brought in something like $360 billion to states, various states, including California, and now California is back at it around Sue Big Oil, and they announced their action in September of this year. I think it's worthwhile joining the municipalities. We're not alone in the fight. It's an issue of keeping our district financially secure. And I don't think our taxpayers in Metchosin should pay full freight And the idea here is simply asking for the fair share from the oil companies. You've heard it's $1 per resident. We spent $5,000 roughly. We spent $15,000 already just on regular plan. There'll be more costs coming. And I'm hoping that it might, if BC gets going, it'll help in terms of pushback for the companies and their behavior.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I have to confess I'm torn on this one. Not because of the issue, not because of consideration about the role of fossil fuels in climate change, but it is an understanding or a grappling, which I feel like every day, about the role of fossil fuels in our lives. And I just personally, I have a concern about engaging in something that, it sets up an adversarial relationship, which I mean, there might be some room with that. Ultimately, I want to just express, and I would be interested to hear the rest of my council colleagues, we do have a very complicated relationship with fossil fuels. I mean, take even British Columbia. There was a time, I believe it still probably happens now, that the dams in BC that supply non-emitting power used to be stopped up in the evening, and BC would import typically coal-fired energy from Alberta. So there's an implication or an impact there. The Mayor of Vancouver mentioned this, I think earlier this year, that pretty much everything we do has a fossil fuel connection to it. I was having a conversation the other day with somebody where we were talking about the role of renewables in the future and how we have to move there as quickly as we can, to which I agreed. But I explained what I see as the complications of that and asked her if she could think about removing herself from fossil fuels from her life. She happened to have a husband who works in the fossil fuel industry, as do a number of residents in Metchosin. So I'm struck by in some ways the hypocrisy of doing this. I recognize though that some of the points are well founded. It's just that there's a complicated relationship with fossil fuels, and I just having trouble disentangling myself as we consider this. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Little.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to Andrew for his presentation. I do understand climate change, and I do understand the costs of climate change. What I'm worried about is the bottom line of the Metchosin's budget. We have a very small operational budget. I think I'm torn. I don't know whether this is a good use of our resources, both staff time and our budget, taxpayers' dollars. And I could see, and I applaud the state of California for putting their big US dollars behind this. And I suspect that's where the traction's going to come. We are a small municipality, and I would rather see us focus our dollars locally on what we can do within our own confines, with our own bylaws, within our jurisdiction, to do as much as we can to mitigate the risks of climate change. And so I'm torn as well. I'll be interested to hear what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thank you to Mr. Gage for his presentation as well. And the examples of the various lawsuits that we have seen throughout the world, and the impacts they have taken. I'm also trying to grapple with this. It's, $5,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money. On average, $5,000 is the average amount of people we have here, $1 each. There are a lot of asks. Last year was a tight budget. It was also an expensive hike for our taxpayers. This year is not going to be a lot different. There's a lot of asks for a lot of services, and there's very few resources. So being fiscally responsible, not sure that I'm not sure if this is a commitment that I could make on behalf of our constituents at this time, but I certainly want to keep open to that as things unfold. I'm sure this isn't going to go away. This is a pretty big subject. Certainly would like to have more education, not just myself, but sort of for our constituents of other things we can do locally. As Mayor Lilla has said, we're working on some things that are within our reach, and we do have the climate action plan. So, yeah, I'm going to keep open to what other things that we can do that are maybe attainable for this community.
Thank you. Councillor Epp.
Yeah, through you, ask the CFO if there's, a way that we can come up with this money in a more painless way. I do think that, I recognize Councillor Shukin's comments that we certainly all use a lot of the products, well, a lot of them, that come from those companies. But also, we also use a lot of pharmaceuticals, and that that lawsuit went through, and we still use our drugs. We just hold them accountable, and as we know, they make so much incredible amounts of money and profits all the time, and have forever. And I think that they should be accountable for some of that. And as we know, we wouldn't. If this goes ahead, there's probably a good chance, it sounds like anyway, but nobody really knows whether we would actually win. If not, we would get our money back. As far as I gather, we would get our money back if we don't get all the support, or enough support, right?
Sorry, am I allowed to answer
Yeah.
If there's not enough funds raised, then yes, no money needs to be spent at all. If it don't get to the point where the lawsuit is viable. I also should have made it clear that West Coast environmental law is not likely to be the lawyers handling this. We're not specialists in class action litigation, so we're not asking for these funds for ourselves. Where the suggestion would be that the lead plaintiffs and the local governments hire their own legal team that specialize in that in class action litigation.
Okay, thank you.
So through yourself, Councillor Gray, is the question about raising the funds for $1 per resident. There really is no any other way except we'll just have to, if council passes the motion to support the going ahead with this campaign, that it'll have to be a line item for say $50, $200, whatever, estimating for working up to $1 per resident for this initiative.
I think in terms of timing, though, we're not looking at this year's budget. There's lots of work that the proponents will be doing over the year, and so the question comes later. In fact, it's getting the pledges for $500,000, and then once the pledges are all in, then we would be asked to pay at that point. So it's kind of a planning ahead kind of thing. I might just reply to a couple of the comments, because I think it's worth saying this, that when you think of the tobacco lawsuits, what happened there was the people who were using the tobacco, just like the people using the opioids, they're not receiving the money or the relief. So those of us using fossil fuels, we're not getting the relief here. The notion is that the municipal governments have the infrastructure costs that need to be dealt with. And if you look at our climate plan, or if you recall our climate plan, as you go through, you see the dollar signs beside all the items. Some have a single dollar sign, some have $2 signs, some have $3 signs. To actually achieve our climate plan, we're going to have to do some spending. And so the idea here is that we're looking to relieve the taxpayers actually of costs, not burden them with additional costs. So this is an opportunity to do that. In terms of the hypocrisy, I guess, maybe I'll just take a moment. I think the correspondence we received from Ruth Turner might be helpful in this regard. or Ruth Nickel, excuse me. She writes, Dear Mayor Little and all council, I live in Metchosin and understand the agenda includes the topic of Sue Big Oil. I much support this action. I support this because our planet is in so much trouble. I'm afraid, it's so very sad, and I'm outraged because now we know that the petrochemical industry has known for decades that business as usual placed the earth on a suicidal road, yet they've lied about it, paying huge sums to hide the truth, and to this day continue to deny responsibility. Their actions are identical to big tobacco. Deny, pay to hide the truth, keep them making obscene profits while people die like experimental animals. Finally, grassroots people pressured governments to drag big tobacco to the courts, and the courts are finding big tobacco guilty. The Canadian courts are in the process. Several of our neighboring municipalities have voted to sue Big Oil, so we're not alone on this. She goes on to say the rising costs of climate damage will be with us for generations, and we need money to meet them. We're facing a climate catastrophe. We have been intentionally deceived by greedy, dishonest, powerful companies, so let's do it, sue Big Oil. I think the point is, and our presentation this evening wasn't about gouging Big Oil. It's about getting our fair share to relieve our taxpayers of the costs that we're now facing. I do, though, understand that it's a complicated topic. I'm not saying that, but the notion of getting our fair share seems reasonable enough to me at a relatively low investment. The other point, joining other groups, but also getting the thing moving, giving it a bit of inertia. No cost to us tonight, no cost this year, I would guess, and we've got lots of time to plan for next year if we do make a commitment. Oh, Councillor Schuppen.
Sorry. Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Gray. I don't think Ms. Nichols' letter, it's very well written. I don't really think that addressed the issue of hypocrisy at all. I see it as a plea for action for sure, but I still see it. And again, I'm troubled again with the issue, given that there are many people in this community who have made, been a part of the oil and gas industry and are still a part of the oil and gas industry. One thing that does strike me, we have our share of local environmental issues, which I feel like we have not really grasped. Some of these issues have been around for a number of years, which, known or unknown, we have not dealt with them adequately. I actually feel at this point, this motion for this community is a bit of a distraction. I wonder if we can postpone a decision on this until there is more momentum, so we know what the direction is. And I do feel like for this community and for this table, it is probably better to focus very locally on issues that we've seen and know that exist right now. So,
thank you. Maybe I'll just respond by saying that I've worked my entire career in healthcare, and my wages were in large measure provided through resource extraction. So I'm not feeling I don't feel any different from the oil and gas workers myself. Never having worked in the oil and gas industry, never worked in the industry. My wages came from resource extraction quite clearly. But what we're seeing now is a change that we need to make in terms of where we're going on the planet. I stand with the oil and gas workers. We need to go to a new place. Clearly, we're not the same council as was here before, the last council, which probably this never would hit the table. Maybe the council before that, it wouldn't either. We're a new council here, and I don't know that we should rely on what previous councils did or didn't do. The three of us ran as climate champions in the election, and we were elected. People knew we were serious about the climate emergency. But I'll leave it there, unless someone else would like to speak. Great, well, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Councillor Upton, Councillor Gray. All opposed? Councillor Shukin, Mayor Little, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you very much. Councillor Shukin, I'll take your advice. I'll go back and report to MEASC, of course, our discussion this evening, so they're aware of why we've gone against the recommendation. But I will also take your advice in terms of keeping close contact with West Coast Environmental Law and what's going on. And if things momentum is gained through other councils, I'll bring it back. I'll just say thanks to our guest for departing.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is my council's update. And so I want to say that this month and next month I have the position of acting mayor, and I was honored to attend the Remembrance Day ceremony in Langford in place of Mayor Little. It was a really moving moment and time. We were quite close together. It was pouring rain, as it was, of course, in Machosin that day. There were some tents, but there were quite a few dignitaries and a very large contingent of armed forces personnel and people from the Legion and the police force, the fire department, and then the public. It was really quite something, and I was glad to be there. So thank you for the opportunity, Mayor Little. In terms of the climate action plan, you'll recall we passed a motion. The climate emergency and biodiversity crisis declaration is up on the website, and MEASC is now developing an evaluation framework, which in time will come to council for its review. And my recommendation is really that council continue to consider the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis in all the decisions that we make in adopting policies at the local and at the regional level at the CRD. This issue, by the way, of Subic oil will be coming up at the CRD, and Mayor Little, I hope you can take some of the energy from the meeting today and inject that in the meeting there. And I wish more success. I spoke at a rally on November 18th, organized downtown, called the Frack Free Rally, about leaving LNG in Adjourn. That was on November 18th, and I just think it's important that we keep the discussion going about that. Fracked gas is one of the root causes of the changing climate, BC's biggest climate problem, and I think it's disingenuous to pretend otherwise. And so the push to end fracking, I think, would be a great idea. And then finally, I wanted to note that I've through the CRD, I became aware of the Making Garden Decisions That Prevent Plant Invasives, a webinar that's occurring on December 13th. So anybody who's sees this tonight or is interested, there's a webinar on December 13th that I think might be of interest to people who are gardening, but also interested in limiting invasives, as I think invasives is a big environmental problem for us across BC, and certainly in Chosen. So thanks very much. Now, I think that's pretty much the end of the agenda, except to accept the correspondence that we received, the pinks, and I've mentioned those already. And we don't have any bylaws or other business, so I take a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mayor Little, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. All in favor? Thanks very much. We'll just be a moment or two and we'll switch up and we'll start the community planning meeting.